everybody. My name is Keith Harrington. As Betsy introduced me, I am the Maryland Field Director for CCAN, and it's a real pleasure to be here taking my show on the road with Hugh Haskell again. We were so popular at the Montgomery County League of Women Voters meeting a couple months back, that we were invited to do it again. So thank you for having us here. So I'm here, as Hugh said, I'm going to talk about more about the specifics of kind of what wind power, offshore wind power will mean for Maryland and how we can develop our offshore wind energy resources. So specifically, I'm here to talk about one of the largest clean energy resources that you've probably never really heard of. It's called the Mid-Atlantic Bight. It's a geographic term, and it refers to a large area of the eastern seaboard. And it's very, very windy, and it happens to be very close to a lot of electricity consumers. So it's the perfect place for us after this past summer's catastrophic oil spill to declare that we want windmills and not oil spills off of our coast. But before I get into the details, I want to talk about something that might seem a little unrelated at first. And that is cigarette smoking. So the connection here is that, you know, when we talk about our addiction to oil, and you know, it's a really apt comparison that we're addicted to oil, because when you compare it to cigarettes, it's dirty, it's costly, and we really need to do everything that we can to kick the habit as quickly as possible. So when we're looking at ways to kick the habit, the offshore oil habit, we can learn a lot from ways that smokers have successfully quit. And what studies have shown is that smokers usually respond better to what's called gain-based messaging. Of course, you know, they want to stop quitting, you know, they want to quit smoking because of the negative impacts like lung cancer, but it's really the positive vision of the things that they're going to gain when they kick the habit that really motivates them. You know, they'll have a better self-image, you know, greater health, longer life, you know, more money in their pocket, etc. There's all those motivating things. I used to be a smoker myself, and it was running that really drove me to want to quit smoking. You know, I wanted to be able to run further and faster, so that was really motivational to me. The point here is that when it comes to offshore oil, of course we need to talk about the negatives. Everybody's seen the negatives. We saw it, you know, writ large this summer in the Gulf of Mexico. But we need to give people a positive vision of what our country will look like once we've kicked the offshore oil habit. And that vision that we need to talk about is the Mid-Atlantic Bight. So bight is actually a geographical term. It's B-I-G-H-T. And it refers to what's essentially a really, really large bay. Now everybody see this indentation here between North Carolina and Massachusetts. That's the Mid-Atlantic Bight. And it's such a big body of water that the Chesapeake Bay is essentially a bay within a larger bay. The great thing about it, of course, is that it's full of unharnessed energy. It's got some of the best offshore wind potential in the world. As I said, it's very close to a lot of electricity consumers. But before we get into some of the finer details, I keep wanting to move over there, let's talk about another coastline that we know has a much different form of energy. We're very familiar with this map after this summer's catastrophic oil spill. What this depicts right here along the Gulf of Mexico coast is our offshore oil drilling operations. There are over 4,000 platforms in the Gulf of Mexico, depicted here by all the yellow dots that you see. And you know, it really, when I look at this, it reminds me of, you know, looking up at the night sky and seeing, you know, the Milky Way, stars scattered across the sky. There's so many of them that they actually form, you know, they're like the stars. They form constellations, and fishermen actually have named these constellations of them, given them names like the barbecue pit and the bunny ears that they use to navigate by. That's how many of these things are out there. So we've heard, you know, of the term too big to fail when it comes to the banks and the economic crisis that we've just seen. Well, this is too big to regulate. You know, there are 4,000 platforms, and each one of those platforms is able to tap multiple wells in the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. So there's actually 10,000 punctures, 10,000 wells drilled in the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. That's 10,000 opportunities for another blowout like we just saw this past summer. And this is really too big to regulate, because what we've seen is that the government is making efforts now to try to bring tougher regulations on this offshore oil industry to make sure those kind of disasters don't happen. But even if those tougher regulations get passed, which is doubtful in the current political atmosphere in Washington, it's still going to be impossible to prevent every human error and equipment inevitable equipment failure that's going to occur with a operation that is this sprawling. So 85,000 people also work in this industry. That gives you another sense of the scale. That's more than the entire space agency and space NASA employs in the United States. And another thing is that they keep pushing into deeper and deeper waters. The Deepwater Horizon well, we all remember one of the biggest problems that they had with it. It was really hard to plug at 5,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. This platform that you see here is the Shell Perdido platform. It actually set the world depth drilling record this past year at 8,000 feet below the surface. That's 3,000 feet deeper than the Deepwater Horizon well was. So this is just too big to regulate. And again, I mean, just look at how monstrous this thing is. It's nearly as tall as the Eiffel Tower. If you were to take out that gigantic hole, the yellow part is usually below the surface of the water. You take that out and set it on land, it's nearly as tall as the Eiffel Tower. So there's 4,000 of those things down there. So it's too big to regulate. So enough about oil spills. Let's talk about offshore wind. Let's talk about windmills. One of the great things about wind power is that it is one of the fastest growing energy resources in the world today. And it's offshore wind is particularly good for the eastern United States, and that's again because of this mid-Atlantic bight. So the bight is perfect for creating a clean energy resource that matches the scale of our needs. It stretches, as you can see, the coastline of 9 states. It's 600 miles long. 50,000 square miles in area, and it's not just very windy, but it's also the waters are relatively shallow, so they range from about 50 to 300 feet deep, which allows for safe and cost-effective construction of offshore wind turbines. Another great thing about the Mid-Atlantic bight is that, like a lot of bays, it provides a sort of natural shelter against storms. So a lot of hurricanes, if you look at their paths historically, they tend to come up from the south and be deflected off of North Carolina. We very rarely take direct hits in this region in the Mid-Atlantic bight. So a lot of those wind turbines will thankfully be sheltered from those stronger storms. There was actually a study done by the University of Stanford and Delaware in 2007, which showed that there's enough wind potential in this area, in the Mid-Atlantic bight, to effectively meet 1/3 of U.S. energy needs if it were fully developed at a scale which would include essentially 166,000 offshore wind turbines. So these, another great thing about this is that, as I said, it's very close to a really big energy market. The northeastern United States, if you include Ohio, it is effectively 1/3 of the U.S. energy market. So it's within easy servicing distance of the Mid-Atlantic bight as well. So a really encouraging thing about this is that the resource is already starting to be developed. This was a pretty protracted battle. Many of you probably heard of Cape Wind. It was just about a month before the actually, it was the same week as the Deepwater Horizon spill occurred. The U.S. Department of the Interior gave the approval for the Cape Wind project to go ahead. They got their permits to start moving ahead with this project. This is going to be built in the Nantucket Sound, and it will include 130 modern windmills, which would generate about 450 megawatts of power. That's enough energy to power nearly all of Cape Cod and Nantucket. So when we're talking about potential for our region in particular, there was a study done by the prestigious Able Foundation in Baltimore. This was actually came out just a few months before the Deepwater Horizon spill, and it showed that Maryland has enough wind potential off its coast to effectively meet 2/3 of the state's energy needs if fully developed. And the same day as the Deepwater Horizon spill occurred, the Virginia government released a study showing that there's enough wind energy off of Virginia's coast to power about 750,000 homes forever. So these states, they're located in a really good location in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, near, for instance, the port of Baltimore, and near, we have Sparrow Point in Baltimore where we can construct, the offshore wind turbine towers. So we're in a really great location here to lead the development of this resource. And with that great opportunity comes huge responsibility on our parts to do everything we can to make this project happen. So of course, for all the benefits of wind, we often hear of these criticisms. Hugh was mentioning some of them earlier. One of the common criticisms, and we were actually just interestingly enough doing an action focused on this today. We were at a gas station up in Baltimore, and all 4 TV stations showed up to film us. But this is the issue of how we're going to power our cars. So okay, well, these electric vehicles, they'd be great, but people say, oh, they're years off down the road, and until then, isn't drilling for oil off our coast, isn't it a necessary evil, in order to get us the gasoline that we need to power our cars and trucks? And the answer is no, it's not a necessary evil. There is enough wind power potential off the coast of Virginia to power 3.6 million electric vehicles. And these cars are actually going to be hitting the road a lot faster in a much larger scale than we would think. There are studies that have shown that we can transform a huge proportion of our auto fleet in just a few years over to these electric vehicles. And automakers know it. They know that there's a market developing for this thing. Everybody here's heard of the Nissan Leaf. These cars came on the market, and you have to get on a waiting list now. They're that popular. So 10 other automakers have also announced that they're planning on releasing electric vehicles onto the market in the next couple of years. So when those cars come on the market, we have our clean offshore wind power. Those turbines will be blowing. A lot of these vehicles will be hitting the road within the time frame that we would be developing our first offshore wind farm. So we'd be able to effectively start powering our vehicles with clean offshore wind power. And the technology is coming along. As this comes to scale, as the industry comes to scale, the price of these cars starts coming down, the technology starts developing. This car's range, this is the Tesla Roadster, it can actually travel 245 miles on a single charge. And that's really impressive. This is moving forward in leaps and bounds as far as the technology goes. So, another issue that we often hear about is what's called the intermittency issue. You pointed this out as well. The wind doesn't blow all the time, but we need reliable power 24/7. And this is another problem that the Bight effectively helps to solve. Hugh was mentioning the fact that we're going to be building this transmission line up and down the Mid-Atlantic Bight. That Google is investing $5 billion to make this happen. The point of that transmission line is to connect all of those wind farms that we're going to be building up and down the Mid-Atlantic Bight, so that if wind stops blowing in one part of the Bight, it's big enough that there's always a major weather front moving in and out of some part of it, so that the wind's always blowing somewhere, and you can transfer that power to where it's needed along the Mid-Atlantic Bight to make sure that we do have reliable energy. There's another factor that a lot of people aren't taking into consideration, which is that we do have renewable, what are called firming resources on our grid. So for instance, if our offshore wind power is blowing at excess capacity and is would be putting more energy onto the grid than there's a demand for at a given time, what we can do is we have resources like the Conowingo Dam, which is up near the Pennsylvania border. They can actually cut back on the amount of water that's flowing through, the amount of energy that's being generated from that dam, and it essentially acts like a storage container for that excess energy. They build up that potential behind the dam, and then when the wind stops blowing and they need more, they can then release more water through the dam. So there's ways to help balance that out and provide that reliability. So another issue that we often hear about, the birds. And he looks like he's taken off. This is probably the part that you want to hear. So the birds are an issue that we've heard about. You know, this was one of the biggest things with the Cape Wind project. You know, there was a lot of concern. What about the local environmental impacts? What about the impacts on marine life and the birds? Well, thankfully, there was a very rigorous environmental impact study that was done before they were actually given the permit from the U.S. Department of the Interior. And what it showed is that there would be no significant impacts on bird or other marine life in the region. This study was actually so convincing that the Massachusetts Audubon Society, everybody knows Audubon is big on birds. They're Massachusetts and New England's biggest conservation group. They approved and gave their imprimatur to this offshore wind energy project in Massachusetts. And birds are actually a lot smarter than we would give them credit for. They actually, there was a study done in Europe where they have over 40 existing offshore wind farms. And so they've had these farms for almost 20 years. And they even decided, let's see what happens to these birds when they actually fly. Let's see what happens when migratory birds approach offshore wind turbines. So they put collars, radio collars on them, and they tracked their flight paths. And what you see here, the red dots, you're looking at the wind farm from above. All the red dots are the wind turbines. All the black lines, including the black on the outside, are the flight paths of birds. And as you can see, when they get to those wind turbines, they pretty successfully navigate around, over top, and through the towers. So, a lot smarter than we give them credit for. We don't have to worry about our fine feathered friends. Now, the last thing that we often hear, and this is something that comes up in Maryland, of course, is the visual impacts. So, the good thing about the turbines that are going to be built in the Mid-Atlantic Bight is that the majority of them will be built at least 10 miles off the coast. And that's the same is true here in Maryland. And at that distance, on the very crispest, clearest day, looking out at the horizon, a wind turbine tower will look about maybe as wide as a toothpick at most and about almost half the size of your thumbnail. And that's on the crispest, clearest, winter days. In the summertime when there's haze on the horizon, even that will be blurred out from your view. So it's not going to be a major visual impact. I was actually talking to a fisherman from the Eastern Shore. He says he takes his boat out to the very area, about 10 miles out where they would be, putting these things in, and he looks back towards the shore in Ocean City to try to see those, those really tall hotels and high-rise apartment buildings, and he can't see the tops of them a lot of days. So it's the same thing looking out at sea. You wouldn't really see these wind turbines. So that brings us to our big question here, which is, what do we want? What do we want our future to look like? What do we want off our coast? Do we want to keep pursuing offshore oil drilling? Do we want to keep, growing this offshore oil industry and thinking that we can somehow meet a long-term demand, a rising demand for oil? Or do we want to start shifting our energy economy towards clean offshore wind power and learning to power our cars, our auto fleet, with clean offshore wind power? I think it's a pretty easy question for most of us. It's a pretty easy answer. The answer is no. We want to move towards clean offshore wind energy. Just a really good example of how little we really have to gain from offshore oil drilling. I don't think I have to convince many of you about that, but just as an example, off the coast of Virginia, we have about 6 to 24 days worth of U.S. demand for oil in the reserves off the coast of Virginia. And what one single accident would cause a catastrophe that would stretch from Cape May all the way down to Virginia Beach. So it's just not worth it. So we need to start dramatically shifting to offshore wind energy and developing the Mid-Atlantic Bight. And Dr. Richard Garvine, he was a professor of maritime studies at the University of Delaware. He did that study that showed that if we build 166,000 turbines in the Mid-Atlantic Bight, we could effectively provide power for 1/3 of U.S. energy needs. he was looking at that issue from a technological perspective, and he was asking himself, is this actually feasible? And his conclusion was, technologically, yes, it is feasible. The biggest hurdle that's keeping us back from this is essentially a political hurdle. We don't yet have the political will to make this happen. And he used an example of what America is capable of achieving when we set our minds to something, a really great project. The United States began producing 2,000 warplanes per year in 1939 for World War II, and we increased production each year, and by 1946 had sent 257,000 aircraft into service. We did that in 7 years using 1940s technology. So we can do it. We just have to set our minds to it. And we're getting to work doing that in developing the Mid-Atlantic Bight here in Maryland with the Maryland Offshore Wind Energy Act of 2011. So now getting into a little bit of policy detail about what this bill is all about. To understand why we have the particular policy that the governor introduced, it's really helpful to look at what it has to address, what the challenges are that it has to address. The biggest challenge to developing offshore wind energy right now is the cost. It is more expensive than other energy resources. To build a 500 to 600 megawatt wind farm like we're looking at, it's going to cost billions of dollars. And to get a return, the investors of that money want to make sure that they're getting a good return on their investment. The best way to assure them that they're getting that return on their investment is to make sure that there's a long-term market for the power that they're going to be selling, and that they're going to be getting it back, in terms of the money, that the revenue coming from selling that power, that it's going to help them recoup their costs over the lifespan of the wind farm, which is about 20 to 25 years. So a long-term contract for offshore wind energy that requires utilities to buy power from the farm for 20 to 25 years is the best way to help overcome that financial hurdle. But unfortunately, our energy decision-making in Maryland, it looks at the very short term. It looks, a lot of contracts are entered into for just a few years at a time, maybe 2 to 5 years. And as a result of that, we still get a majority of our energy from dirty fossil fuels. We're just looking at the short-term price. And the unfortunate thing is that prevents us from finding long-term price stability. We've seen our energy costs go up about 75% in the last decade thanks to our reliance on fossil fuels. Also, fuel prices keep going up. But if we look at the long term and making sure that we have long-term price stability, that we're dealing with other long-term problems like climate change and health impacts, we see that long-term contracts for offshore wind is the way to go. And that's exactly what this bill is essentially designed to achieve. It sets up a process, and that's the important thing to realize here. The bill sets up a process. It does not guarantee an outcome. It does not guarantee that any contract will be entered into. It initiates a process whereby developers of offshore wind farms will put forward their best proposals for developing that wind farm. The PSC will then examine those proposals based on a number of criteria, at the top of that list being cost and impact on ratepayers. Now, what the Public Service Commission has done is it's looked at, in order to achieve arrive at what are reasonable cost projections, it's looked at comparable projects that are underway. And there's already a project going forward in Massachusetts, as we know, that's going to be on a similar scale to what we're working on here, 450 megawatts up there. We're looking at 500 to 600 megawatts here. Similar projects going on in Delaware as well. And the prices that have been locked in for those, when they've looked at those prices and then they've scaled it to the size of our project, the Public Service Commission has found that the average monthly impact for ratepayers would be we'd have to pay no more than about 92 cents to up to $2 in higher energy costs each month on our electricity bills. And that's what you could essentially save by switching over to two traditional light bulbs to 2 compact fluorescent light bulbs. Just a couple dollars a month. And this has been one of the biggest areas of controversy around this bill. Of course, while I think obviously paying $1 to $2 extra a month on my utility bill for all of the enormous benefits that are going to come from offshore wind, is actually a great deal and a great investment for our state. You know, a lot of politicians have recently been asking themselves, well, do my constituents want to pay this? Do my constituents want to pay this? And so the administration, you know, listening to the concerns of these lawmakers, just last week, Governor O'Malley announced that they were going to be offering an amendment to ensure that there was a price cap, that proposals are put forward by the companies to the PSC, and if the PSC projects that over, you know, the 20 to 25 year span of these projects, that prices will go up for consumers more than $2 a month, they can just toss those proposals out, and it's essentially an escape clause. They do not have to approve any of these projects. So we do have a guarantee that, you know, we're not going to get saddled with, you know, some of these projections that have been made of, like, you know, $870 a month or whatever that is. No more than $2 for the average consumer, and no more than 2% across all ratepayer classes. So it's a really great deal for all of the benefits that we are going to be getting. And as I said, this is something that other states are already moving ahead with. We have Delaware, New Jersey, Massachusetts. They're all taking steps to make offshore wind happen in their states. We've always been a clean energy leader here in Maryland. You know, we just had a conference back in December on offshore wind energy. There were 300 people in the room. And John Passacantondo, the director of Greenpeace, was there, and he looked out at the room, and you know, he was just, you know, amazed to see all this enthusiasm from people in Maryland for clean energy. And he was also considering all the things that we've already accomplished in this state. You know, global warming bill, great RPS, you know, high fuel efficiency standards for our cars. He said that we are the most hopeful state in the union when it comes to clean energy. So we have this unique place in the United States when it comes to clean energy and fighting climate change, and we have to continue that legacy now by passing the Maryland Offshore Wind Energy Act, and we need all of your help to make that happen. And how are we going to make that happen? Well, the bill's going to be voted on possibly this week. It would have to be voted on next week because session's going to be wrapping up on the 11th. So we have a very small window of time left. But we're pretty confident that we're going to lock in the votes that we need. But from between now and the end of session, we need you to be citizen advocates. We need you to be on the phones. We need you to be sending emails. We need you to get your neighbors involved, to encourage your legislators to support this historic Maryland Offshore Wind Energy Act. Ruth Alice brought along some handouts here for you with information on how to contact your legislators and what to say when you contact them. So we're just going to pass these around. Start these over here. And I'm happy, also another thing you can do is sign the petition, Maryland Offshore Wind Energy petition. We will try to get all of our petitions delivered this week before votes happen. So thank you so much for your support, and I'm happy to entertain questions, as I'm sure Hugh is.